The moment Hillary Clinton looked across the debate stage and said that history would remember Donald Trump as a criminal who belonged in prison, the atmosphere in the room shifted in a way that was impossible to miss. It was not just an attack, it was a declaration meant to end the argument before it began. She delivered it with the confidence of someone who believed the verdict had already been written elsewhere. By courts, by headlines, by the slow grind of time. For her supporters, it sounded like vindication delayed, but finally arrived. For Trump, it sounded like an opening he had been waiting years to hear. In that instant, the debate stopped being about policy, temperament, or the future of the country. It became a confrontation over the past and over who had the authority to define it. Clinton's accusation carried moral weight, the kind designed to frame her opponent as beyond rehabilitation or defense. She was not arguing that Trump had made mistakes. She was arguing that his entire public life should be understood through the lens of criminality. That choice of framing would shape everything that followed. What Clinton appeared to believe, and what many watching at home assumed as well, was that time had tilted the balance in her favor. Trump's legal troubles had been building for months, dominating news cycles and reinforcing a narrative she had been advancing since 2016. To her, the moment felt ripe to finally say out loud what she had long implied. She believed the country was ready to hear it and ready to agree. She did not consider that Trump might welcome the accusation rather than fear it. Trump's reaction was not anger or visible shock, but something closer to recognition. He smiled in a way that unsettled people who had seen him debate before. It was the smile of someone who believed the conversation had finally moved onto ground he had prepared. He did not interrupt her or object to the charge. He let it land, knowing that its force depended entirely on going unanswered. For years, Trump had argued that Clinton and her allies relied on accusation as a substitute for accountability. He had claimed that labels were used to avoid examination of records, timelines, and decisions. Whether one agreed with him or not, it was undeniable that he had spent much of his post-presidency revisiting old controversies tied to Clinton's career. Those controversies had never disappeared, but they had faded into background noise, resurfacing only when politically convenient. Now, with Clinton invoking criminal judgment on live television, Trump treated those unresolved questions as suddenly relevant again. The debate itself had been marketed as a rematch, a chance to revisit a rivalry that defined an earlier political era. For many viewers, it was less about the future than about settling unfinished business from 2016. Social media had fed that hunger for years, speculating about what would happen if the two ever faced each other again with everything that had emerged since. The network hosting the event leaned into that expectation, building the stage and the broadcast to emphasize drama and consequence. It was designed to feel like a final chapter, not a footnote. When Clinton arrived on stage, she looked prepared for confrontation on her terms. Her posture and tone suggested someone expecting to press an advantage rather than defend ground. She spoke as though the arc of recent history supported her, as though public opinion had quietly shifted into alignment with her view. Trump's arrival, delayed just long enough to build anticipation, was met with a response that reminded everyone how divided the audience remained. The room itself mirrored the country, split, tense, and waiting for something decisive. Trump did not bring notes in the casual sense. He brought materials arranged with intention, signaling that his approach would be structured rather than reactive. That alone was enough to create unease among Clinton's supporters, who remembered how he had used prepared facts in past confrontations. It suggested he was not there to trade impressions or slogans. He was there to challenge the premise of her opening statement. As the moderator outlined the format, there was still an assumption that the exchange would follow familiar rhythms. Opening statements would be followed by pointed questions and controlled rebuttals. The rules implied boundaries, a sense that escalation would be contained. Those assumptions began to dissolve the moment Trump reached for his materials after Clinton spoke. What followed did not feel like a rebuttal so much as a redirection of the entire event. Trump did not respond to being called a criminal by defending his own record in abstract terms. He responded by questioning hers, not rhetorically, but sequentially. His tone shifted from conversational to procedural, as though he were laying out a case rather than making a speech. Each question he posed was framed to demand a simple answer, not an explanation. The effect was to reverse the roles Clinton had expected them to play. Clinton, who had anticipated prosecuting Trump in the court of public opinion, suddenly found herself responding to specific claims about her own past. The exchange forced her into a defensive posture she had not planned for in her opening. She had expected to speak broadly about character and consequences. Instead, she was being asked to address details she had long treated as settled or irrelevant. That shift altered the emotional balance of the room. The audience sensed the change immediately. Moments earlier, applause had followed Clinton's declaration with enthusiasm. Now, reactions became uneven, uncertain, and louder on one side than the other. Trump's supporters treated each document reference as confirmation, while Clinton's supporters waited for a decisive rebuttal that did not come quickly. The undecided viewers, those watching without strong allegiance, were left to interpret the imbalance on their own. This was no longer a debate about whose vision for the country was better. It was a confrontation over credibility and unresolved history. Trump's strategy was not to prove Clinton guilty of anything in a legal sense, but to argue that she had never fully answered for controversies that continued to shadow her career. Clinton's challenge was to prevent those controversies from defining the night. The tension lay in whether she could reassert control of the narrative she had opened. From the opening minutes, it became clear that the core conflict was not about individual allegations in isolation. It was about who had the right to stand on a debate stage and declare the other unfit to lead. Clinton asserted that right by invoking law, history, and moral judgment. Trump contested it by insisting that judgment without examination was hollow. That clash of approaches defined the opening phase of the encounter. For viewers, the experience was unsettling precisely because it did not follow expectations. Many had tuned in expecting familiar arguments replayed with new intensity. Instead, they watched a shift from abstraction to confrontation, from general accusation to pointed inquiry. Whether one found Trump persuasive or not, the structure of his response forced attention onto Clinton's record rather than his own. That inversion was the defining feature of the opening. The significance of the moment lay not in any single claim, but in the dynamic it created. A candidate who had framed herself as the voice of accountability was being asked to account. A candidate accused of criminality refused to argue innocence in the abstract, and chose instead to question the credibility of the accuser. The audience was no longer being told what to think. They were being asked, implicitly, to decide who was entitled to judge. As the opening unfolded, it became clear that this confrontation was less about settling facts than about reshaping perception. Clinton's opening line had been designed to close the door on debate by appealing to authority beyond the room. Trump's response pried that door back open by insisting that unresolved questions still mattered. The clash exposed a deeper issue in American politics: the gap between accusation and accountability. That gap would remain at the center of everything that followed. By the end of the opening phase, the debate had already escaped the format meant to contain it. What began as a declarative attack had turned into a struggle over narrative control. Clinton had tried to define Trump in a single sentence. Trump had refused the definition and countered by reopening a history Clinton believed was behind her. The rest of the night would be shaped by that refusal. This opening was not the conclusion Clinton expected, nor the defense Trump's critics assumed he would attempt. It was the starting point of a larger confrontation over legitimacy, memory, and power. The question hanging over the stage was no longer whether Trump was a criminal. It was whether Clinton could sustain her moral authority under direct challenge. And with that question unresolved, the debate moved forward into far more dangerous territory. Trump did not rush the moment that followed. He let the silence stretch just long enough for the audience to realize that Clinton's opening line had not ended the conversation, but redirected it. Then he spoke calmly, almost conversationally, as if asking a procedural question rather than launching an attack. His first move was not to deny the accusation, but to question the authority behind it. That choice reframed the encounter in a way Clinton had not anticipated. Instead of defending himself in broad strokes, Trump focused on sequence. He asked questions that moved backward through time, returning the audience to moments Clinton had spent years trying to leave behind. Each question was narrow, framed to demand clarity rather than interpretation. This forced Clinton into a dilemma she had not prepared for. If she answered directly, she risked reopening controversies she believed were settled, and if she deflected, she appeared evasive. The exchange shifted into a rhythm that felt more like interrogation than debate. Trump would pose a question, pause, and wait. Clinton would begin with context, explanation, or institutional language. Trump would interrupt just long enough to repeat the question in simpler terms. The effect was cumulative, creating the impression that the answers themselves mattered less than the hesitation before them. For viewers, this rhythm carried psychological weight. People watching at home were not parsing legal distinctions or procedural nuance. They were watching confidence collide with constraint. Clinton had entered the stage believing she could speak freely about Trump's alleged wrongdoing. Now she was navigating questions that limited her freedom to reframe. The first major theme Trump returned to was the idea of records. He emphasized documentation, not conclusions. He spoke about public records, investigative reports, and timelines that had been debated for years but rarely assembled in one place. He did not claim that these records proved crimes beyond dispute. He argued instead that they proved something else, that Clinton's public image rested on unanswered questions rather than resolved ones. Clinton responded by invoking institutions. She referenced investigations, reviews, and official findings. Her language emphasized process, the idea that authorities had examined these issues and chosen not to pursue charges. This had been her most effective defense for years. But in the context of the debate, it clashed with Trump's narrower framing. Trump did not dispute that investigations had occurred. He acknowledged them openly, sometimes even citing them. What he questioned was the conclusion that investigation alone equaled exoneration in the court of public trust. He argued that political accountability and legal outcomes were not the same thing. That distinction resonated with parts of the audience that already felt institutions protected elites. As the exchange continued, the tension grew less about facts themselves and more about who controlled interpretation. Clinton spoke in the language of governance, emphasizing complexity and shared responsibility. Trump spoke in the language of causality, emphasizing decisions and outcomes. Neither approach was new, but their collision on the same stage amplified the contrast. The debate became a study in how political narratives are built. At several points, Clinton attempted to redirect the conversation back to Trump. She referenced his legal challenges, his rhetoric, and the risks she believed he posed to democratic norms. These moments drew applause from her supporters, but they did not regain control of the exchange. Each time she pivoted, Trump treated it as confirmation that she was avoiding the questions he had raised. The audience response reflected that perception. Trump's strategy was not subtle, but it was consistent. He returned again and again to the idea that Clinton's authority to judge him depended on her willingness to answer for her own record. He framed his questions as matters the public had never heard addressed directly, even if they had been covered extensively in media. This distinction mattered because it appealed to a sense of exclusion many viewers felt. They were being invited into a conversation they believed had been conducted above their heads. As the debate moved deeper into its core, the moderator attempted to restore structure. Questions were redirected, time limits were enforced, and interruptions were discouraged. But the tone had already shifted. The audience no longer perceived the moderator as the central authority. Attention had shifted entirely to the exchange between the two candidates. Clinton's challenge grew more difficult as the minutes passed. She was being asked to compress years of controversy into sound bites that could not accommodate nuance. Any attempt to explain risked appearing defensive. Any refusal to engage risked appearing dismissive. The format worked against her in ways she had not anticipated. Trump, by contrast, appeared energized by the constraints. Short answers, yes or no framing, and visual references played to his strengths as a communicator. He did not need to persuade skeptics of every claim. He needed only to create doubt about Clinton's moral certainty. In that respect, the strategy was effective. One of the most striking aspects of the exchange was how little policy substance emerged. This was not because policy did not matter, but because it was crowded out by the weight of unresolved history. Every attempt to pivot toward future plans collapsed under the gravitational pull of past controversies. The debate became backward-looking by necessity rather than choice. That backward focus reflected a broader problem in American politics, where unresolved disputes linger indefinitely. As the audience watched, reactions became more polarized. Supporters of each candidate interpreted the same moments differently. Clinton's supporters saw a leader unfairly burdened by recycled allegations. Trump's supporters saw accountability finally enforced in public view. Undecided viewers were left to judge tone, confidence, and composure as much as substance. The debate also exposed the limits of reputational defenses. For years, Clinton had relied on the argument that she had been investigated extensively and cleared of wrongdoing. That argument had been effective within institutional contexts. On a debate stage, however, it sounded procedural rather than persuasive. Trump exploited that gap by speaking directly to frustration rather than process. As the confrontation escalated, the emotional toll on Clinton became visible. Her responses grew shorter, more guarded. She maintained composure, but the ease of her opening moments had faded. Each new line of questioning forced her to choose between explanation and dismissal. Neither choice fully restored her momentum. Trump, sensing the shift, leaned into summary. He began linking individual controversies into a broader narrative about trust and power. He argued that Clinton's career symbolized a political class insulated from consequences. He did not present this as a legal argument, but as a moral one. That framing appealed to viewers who believed the system favored insiders. The audience response reflected this shift in emphasis. Applause no longer followed ideological lines alone. It followed moments where the exchange felt decisive. Clinton's supporters applauded her defiance, but Trump's supporters dominated moments where questions went unanswered. The undecided section of the audience reacted unpredictably, sometimes applauding neither side. As the debate approached its midpoint, it became clear that Clinton's opening accusation had backfired. By invoking criminal judgment, she had invited scrutiny rather than closure. Trump had accepted that invitation eagerly. The night was no longer about whether Trump belonged in prison. It was about whether Clinton could sustain the moral authority she claimed. The broader implications of the exchange extended beyond the two candidates. The debate exposed a structural flaw in modern political discourse. Accusations are easy to make, but difficult to resolve in public forums. When institutions fail to produce outcomes that satisfy public expectations, debates become proxy trials. This dynamic rewards confrontation over clarity. Trump's approach capitalized on that flaw. He did not promise resolution through institutions. He promised exposure through confrontation. That promise resonated because it aligned with widespread skepticism toward elite accountability. Clinton's reliance on institutional validation felt out of step with that mood. As the final segment approached, both candidates attempted to reassert their core messages. Clinton emphasized stability, experience, and democratic norms. Trump emphasized disruption, challenge, and unfinished business. Neither fully escaped the gravitational pull of the exchange they had created. The audience remained focused on credibility rather than vision. By the time closing statements loomed, the debate had already achieved its defining moment. It was not a policy breakthrough or rhetorical flourish. It was the inversion of roles established at the outset. The accuser had become the respondent. The accused had become the interrogator. Trump used his remaining time to reinforce that inversion. He summarized his questions rather than his conclusions. He framed the night as an invitation for viewers to reconsider assumptions they had been encouraged to accept. He avoided explicit declarations of guilt, focusing instead on the absence of clear answers. That restraint, deliberate or not, amplified the effect. Clinton's closing effort sought to reclaim moral ground. She reiterated her belief in institutional accountability and the rule of law. She warned against conflating allegation with truth. Her message was coherent and familiar, but it struggled to erase the impact of the preceding exchange. As the debate ended, the audience reaction was mixed but intense. Applause and chants reflected deep divisions rather than consensus. There was no shared sense of resolution. Instead, there was a heightened awareness of unresolved conflict. The debate had not settled questions, but it had sharpened them. In the hours that followed, clips circulated rapidly online. Moments of hesitation, interruption, and pointed questioning were replayed without context. Supporters on both sides claimed vindication. Media coverage focused less on policy and more on performance. The debate became another chapter in an ongoing narrative rather than an endpoint. What distinguished this exchange from many others was not the substance of the claims, but the structure of the confrontation. By accepting Clinton's framing and then turning it inward, Trump had shifted the burden of proof. Clinton, by invoking moral judgment so directly, had exposed herself to that shift. The result was a debate remembered less for answers than for role reversal. That reversal would shape public discussion long after the stage lights dimmed. As viewers reflected on what they had seen, reactions varied widely. Some saw confirmation of long-held suspicions. Others saw a reminder of how easily political theater can masquerade as accountability. Few came away unchanged. The debate had succeeded in one respect. It forced attention onto questions many preferred to avoid. In the end, the main body of the confrontation revealed something fundamental. Political debates are no longer just about persuading voters. They are about controlling narratives of legitimacy. When those narratives collide, facts alone are not enough to resolve them. What remains is perception, memory, and trust. The clash between Clinton and Trump did not produce closure. It produced a reckoning of a different kind. It reminded the audience that unresolved history does not disappear simply because time passes. When invoked publicly, it demands response. And, once demanded, it reshapes the entire conversation. As the immediate aftermath unfolded, the debate refused to remain confined to the studio. It spilled outward into newsrooms, social feeds, and private conversations almost instantly. The first wave of reaction was emotional rather than analytical, driven by clips that isolated moments of pressure and response. Each side seized fragments that confirmed existing beliefs. The larger exchange, with its pacing and accumulation, was harder to compress and slower to digest. Trump's supporters interpreted the night as validation of a long-standing grievance. To them, the debate finally reflected what they believed institutions had failed to deliver. They focused less on whether every claim would withstand legal scrutiny, and more on the act of public confrontation itself. For these viewers, the performance mattered as much as the substance. It felt like a reckoning they had been promised for years. Clinton's supporters saw something very different. They argued that the debate had been hijacked by repetition and spectacle. In their view, Trump had relied on familiar controversies rather than addressing current challenges. They emphasized that investigations had not produced criminal charges and warned against conflating political attack with justice. To them, the exchange demonstrated how easily public forums can be distorted. Between those camps sat a quieter audience trying to make sense of what they had witnessed. These viewers were less interested in chanting or dismissal. They noticed the shift in tone, the change in posture, and the way momentum moved across the stage. They were not deciding guilt or innocence, but competence and credibility. For them, the night raised uncomfortable questions rather than offering clear answers. Media coverage reflected these divisions almost immediately. Some outlets framed the debate as a turning point, emphasizing Trump's command of the exchange. Others described it as an example of political theater overwhelming substance. Headlines varied wildly depending on editorial leanings. Yet even critical coverage acknowledged the intensity of the encounter. One recurring theme across analyses was the role of preparation. Commentators noted how Trump's structured approach contrasted with Clinton's more traditional debate posture. Preparation was interpreted either as seriousness or as stagecraft, depending on perspective. What could not be denied was its impact on pacing. The debate moved according to Trump's rhythm rather than the moderator's. Clinton's challenge in the hours after the debate was narrative repair. She emphasized experience, steadiness, and institutional trust. Her team circulated statements highlighting investigations and official conclusions. They sought to reframe the night as a distraction from urgent national issues. But reframing proved difficult once the initial impressions had set. Trump, meanwhile, leaned into the ambiguity he had created. He did not declare victory outright. Instead, he repeated the idea that questions remained unanswered. That restraint allowed supporters to fill in conclusions themselves. It also shielded him from accusations of overreach. The debate reignited older arguments about accountability in public life. Many viewers asked why certain controversies never seemed to reach definitive resolution. Others questioned whether televised confrontations could ever substitute for due process. The exchange became a proxy for broader frustration with political systems. It was not just about Clinton or Trump, but about trust in authority. As days passed, longer analyses began to surface. Some writers broke down specific claims, timelines, and statements. Others focused on rhetorical technique and audience psychology. The more detailed the analysis became, the clearer it was that the debate had functioned on multiple levels at once. It was simultaneously a political event, a media spectacle, and a cultural flashpoint. For Clinton, the lingering issue was perception. She had entered the debate intending to assert moral clarity. Instead, she was perceived by many as reactive. That perception mattered regardless of factual rebuttals. In politics, posture often shapes memory more than detail. Trump's performance benefited from that dynamic. He did not need to convince everyone. He needed only to disrupt Clinton's certainty. By doing so, he reopened questions that had been fading from public focus. The effect was less about persuasion and more about destabilization. The debate also highlighted the limits of institutional language in emotional arenas. Terms like investigation, review, and process carry weight in formal settings. On a debate stage, they can sound abstract. Trump exploited that difference by grounding his approach in direct questioning. Clinton's reliance on institutional validation struggled to resonate under those conditions. Another factor shaping reaction was fatigue. Many viewers were exhausted by years of political conflict. Some welcomed the confrontation as cathartic. Others recoiled from what they saw as endless relitigation of the past. The debate intensified that fatigue rather than resolving it. As commentary accumulated, one insight became increasingly common. The exchange had revealed how differently Americans define accountability. For some, accountability means legal consequence after formal investigation. For others, it means public reckoning, regardless of legal outcome. Those definitions rarely overlap, and the debate exposed that divide. Clinton's long career had been built within the first definition. She trusted processes, institutions, and official conclusions. Trump's political rise had been fueled by skepticism toward those same structures. On the debate stage, those philosophies collided. Neither could fully displace the other. The intensity of the night also owed much to unresolved memory. The 2016 election still loomed large for both candidates and their supporters. For Clinton, it represented an outcome she believed had been distorted by external forces. For Trump, it represented validation against overwhelming odds. That unresolved history charged every exchange. Observers noted how often both candidates returned to that past implicitly or explicitly. It functioned as a reference point for credibility. Each sought to interpret it in a way that justified their present stance. The debate became less about moving forward than about settling interpretation. That backward pull shaped the entire main body of the exchange. In the following weeks, polling reflected movement but not consensus. Some respondents reported increased doubts about Clinton's trustworthiness. Others reported increased concern about Trump's confrontational style. Few reported changing their core political alignment. The debate shifted intensity more than allegiance. Political strategists studied the event closely. They debated whether Clinton should have avoided the criminal framing altogether. Some argued that it handed Trump the opening he wanted. Others insisted that failing to name concerns would have looked weak. The disagreement mirrored the larger divide among viewers. Trump's team framed the night as proof of strategic discipline. They emphasized preparation, focus, and control. Clinton's team framed it as an example of spectacle overpowering substance. Both interpretations contained elements of truth. The debate had been both disciplined and theatrical. The broader media ecosystem amplified extremes. Short clips circulated more widely than full exchanges. Context was stripped away in favor of reaction. The nuance of long-form analysis struggled to compete. This distortion reinforced existing polarization. As attention gradually shifted to other events, the debate's legacy remained unsettled. It was referenced whenever questions of accountability resurfaced. It became shorthand for confrontation over credibility. Neither side achieved definitive closure. The unresolved nature of the exchange ensured its endurance. What ultimately defined the main body of the debate was not a single revelation. It was the sustained pressure created by role reversal. The accuser was compelled to respond. The accused refused to remain defensive. That inversion altered expectations for the entire encounter. For many viewers, the debate reinforced a cynical conclusion. Politics, they felt, had become less about solutions and more about exposure. Candidates were rewarded for destabilizing opponents rather than persuading skeptics. The debate exemplified that shift. It offered intensity rather than resolution. Yet there was also a quieter takeaway. The exchange demonstrated the power of framing. A single line at the opening had reshaped 2 hours of discourse. That line had not settled anything legally, but it had determined the battlefield. As analysts revisited the night, they noted how fragile authority can be on a public stage. Moral certainty invites challenge. Challenge demands response. Response under pressure can redefine reputation. That cycle was on full display. In retrospect, the debate functioned as a mirror. Supporters on each side saw confirmation of what they already believed. Skeptics saw a system locked in perpetual conflict. Undecided viewers saw the difficulty of extracting truth from spectacle. No single interpretation prevailed. The main body of the encounter thus revealed its central paradox. It was presented as a reckoning, yet it produced no final judgment. It was framed as accountability, yet it relied on performance. It promised clarity, yet delivered complexity. That paradox explains both its impact and its limitations. As the conversation gradually moved on, the unresolved questions remained. They lingered not because they had been answered, but because they had been reignited. The debate ensured that neither candidate could fully escape the past. It also ensured that viewers would continue arguing over its meaning. In that sense, the main body achieved its effect. What followed next would not erase what had occurred. The opening accusation had triggered a confrontation that reshaped the night. The sustained exchange had deepened divisions rather than bridging them. The debate ended, but the narrative it generated continued. And it continued precisely because it refused to resolve what it exposed. By the time the debate faded from the immediate news cycle, what remained was not a verdict, but a residue. It lingered in commentary, in late-night discussions, and in the way both candidates were referenced afterward. The encounter resisted simple classification as a win or a loss. Instead, it became a reference point, a moment repeatedly invoked whenever questions of credibility and accountability surfaced. Its significance lay less in what was proven than in what was forced into the open. For Hillary Clinton, the debate marked a shift in how her public legacy was discussed. She had entered the stage seeking to place Donald Trump within a definitive moral frame. In doing so, she assumed that time, institutions, and public fatigue had softened scrutiny of her own record. The exchange demonstrated that unresolved controversies, once reopened, do not fade easily. Even without legal consequences, they regain power when revisited under direct pressure. Trump's role in that dynamic was equally revealing. He did not seek exoneration through the debate. He sought disruption of certainty by refusing to argue innocence in abstract terms and focusing instead on Clinton's authority to accuse. He shifted the burden of persuasion. That strategy did not resolve questions about his conduct, but it altered how those questions competed for attention. The debate underscored a recurring truth in modern politics. Public trust is not restored by process alone. Investigations and official findings matter, but they do not automatically translate into legitimacy in the public imagination. When institutions fail to produce outcomes that feel satisfying or transparent, audiences turn to confrontation as a substitute. The debate became a stage on which that substitution played out. For many viewers, the exchange crystallized their existing beliefs rather than changing them. Supporters of Clinton continued to see her as a figure unfairly burdened by controversy long adjudicated. Supporters of Trump saw confirmation that elites evade consequences through procedural shields. The debate did not bridge that divide. It widened it by giving each side new material to reinforce their narratives. Yet, there was also a segment of the audience that reacted differently. These viewers were less invested in vindication and more attuned to tone and posture. They noticed how quickly the conversation left the future behind. They sensed how unresolved history dominated the exchange. For them, the debate raised concerns about the health of political discourse itself. One of the lasting lessons of the encounter was the power of framing. A single sentence at the opening had redirected 2 hours of conversation. By declaring Trump a criminal who belonged in prison, Clinton had attempted to close debate. Instead, she had opened a door to scrutiny she could not fully control. That reversal illustrated how moral certainty, when asserted publicly, invites challenge rather than silence. The event also revealed the fragility of authority on a debate stage. Titles, experience, and institutional backing offer limited protection in a confrontational setting. Once a candidate is forced into defense, the symbolic balance shifts. Clinton's reliance on process struggled to compete with Trump's emphasis on direct questioning. That imbalance shaped perception more than any individual claim. Trump's performance, however, came with its own limitations. While effective in destabilizing Clinton's position, it offered little in the way of resolution. By focusing on exposure rather than explanation, he reinforced a cycle of suspicion without closure. For viewers seeking clarity or forward-looking solutions, the debate offered frustration rather than guidance. That absence underscored a broader problem in political spectacle. The exchange also highlighted how media ecosystems amplify division. Short clips replaced sustained analysis. Moments of tension circulated without context. Each side consumed content that confirmed its perspective. The debate's complexity was flattened into talking points that traveled faster than nuance. In the weeks that followed, the debate's influence persisted indirectly. It shaped how both candidates were discussed, even when unrelated issues arose. References to credibility, trust, and unresolved history became shorthand in commentary. Neither Clinton nor Trump could escape the frame the debate had established. It became part of their political identities moving forward. From a broader perspective, the encounter served as a case study in the limits of televised accountability. Debates are not courts. They cannot determine guilt or innocence. Yet they increasingly function as arenas where moral judgment is implied, rather than adjudicated. That tension creates expectations they cannot fulfill. The debate also reflected a deeper anxiety within the electorate. Many Americans feel caught between skepticism toward institutions and exhaustion with perpetual conflict. They want accountability, but distrust the mechanisms meant to deliver it. They crave resolution, but consume spectacle that delays it. The Clinton-Trump confrontation embodied that contradiction. For Clinton, the debate illustrated the cost of unresolved legacy. Avoidance, even when justified by institutional outcomes, leaves space for future challenge. The night demonstrated that political memory is persistent and easily reactivated. Her attempt to assert final judgment instead exposed lingering doubt. That exposure reshaped how her career was discussed afterward. For Trump, the debate reinforced his role as a disruptor rather than a reconciler. He succeeded in unsettling his opponent, but not in offering a shared narrative. His strategy thrived on confrontation and skepticism. That approach energized supporters while alienating others. It maintained polarization rather than reducing it. As time passed, the debate settled into a symbolic role. It was cited in discussions about accountability, media bias, and political theater. It became an example used by analysts to illustrate the power of preparation and framing. It also became a cautionary tale about the risks of absolutist rhetoric. Its meaning evolved with each retelling. Ultimately, the debate did not change the fundamental trajectories of either candidate. It did not resolve legal questions or rewrite institutional outcomes. What it changed was emphasis. It shifted attention back to unresolved history and away from future policy. That shift had consequences for public discourse. The lasting impact of the encounter lay in its reminder that political narratives are fragile. They depend on consensus that can be disrupted by confrontation. When that consensus erodes, accusations lose their finality. The debate demonstrated how quickly certainty can be challenged. It also demonstrated how difficult it is to restore once questioned. In the end, the Clinton-Trump debate was less a trial than a mirror. It reflected the country's divisions, frustrations, and unresolved arguments. It showed how deeply the past continues to shape the present. It revealed the limits of both institutional authority and performative confrontation. It left viewers with questions rather than answers. As a piece of political theater, the debate was compelling. As a moment of accountability, it was incomplete. Its power came from tension rather than resolution. Its legacy came from memory rather than outcome, and that is why it continues to be discussed. The encounter did not close a chapter. It reopened one many believed was finished. In doing so, it reminded the audience that unresolved history does not disappear. It waits for the moment when it is invoked again. That moment, for better or worse, arrived on that debate stage. When the lights went out and the audience dispersed, nothing had been settled definitively. Yet something had shifted. Perceptions hardened, doubts resurfaced, and narratives were redrawn. The debate ended, but its questions endured. And in modern politics, endurance often matters more than resolution. This conclusion, like the debate itself, resists final judgment. It acknowledges complexity without offering closure. It recognizes impact without claiming consensus. The Clinton-Trump confrontation stands as a reminder that political reckoning rarely arrives cleanly. More often, it arrives as an argument that refuses to end.